The breaking point has come, and I don't know how to feel about it. On the one hand, well, mostly on this hand, I wholeheartedly believe it's time for a fundamental change to how the political system operates in the UK, and if we cannot change things at the ballot box, which is where we should, well, sadly, you give people little recourse to do anything else than things like this. On the other, much smaller hand, seeing the country in flames is not an outcome that anyone really wants. Not unless you are personally profiting on such madness, of course. Yes, it is true that the tipping point was the lives lost in Southport, 3 girls who should be enjoying the summer holidays today. But this dissatisfaction, this resentment, bordering on pure hatred has been bubbling beneath the surface for years. Going as far back as the early 1990s, when John Major signed the Maastricht Treaty, this was the first signal that those with power were going to be making decisions without our consent. This was further confirmed when people, still trying to change things via the ballot box, voted in a massive red wave, a new Labour government under Tony Blair. People hoped this would mean a better life. And for 12 years, under both Blair and Brown, what did we have? Illegal wars, terrorist attacks, heavy taxation, a financial crash, and of course, the first wave of high immigration. But again, people hoped for the best. They believe in democracy. And thus began 14 years of Tory rule. Tory rule that operated under a one nation narrative, that being, for those abroad who don't know, is a centrist narrative, another version of New Labour. What did this other version of New Labour bring? Immigration at disastrous levels, gay marriage, National Health Service damage, several wars, not having a true Brexit, obsession with green initiatives, and a further obsession with childhood transgenderism. Remember, these are meant to be conservatives. Is anything in that list I just said remotely conservative to you? You have to understand, people have tried. They have tried voting their way out of this situation. They voted for Brexit to take back control, as politicians said. Further voting in a massive majority for Boris Johnson so that Brexit would be delivered properly. But what happened? Betrayal. Betrayal on several fronts. 2 or so years after being voted in, Conservative Party MPs turned on Boris Johnson and pushed him out. Like him or not, he was the elected leader, the face people saw when they voted Conservative in 2019, irrespective if they were directly voting for him or not. By not calling another election so that the people could decide if they approved of this or not, was the beginning of the end. The Tories instead did things internally. Only Tory members voted for the new leader of the whole UK. The whole UK. A leader that incidentally lasted for 49 days. And that's it. Then, another leader came to be, which was Rishi Sunak, someone you all know, and was installed like royalty. Yes, that's right, installed. And that was that. People had lost faith. Yes, Labour won the next election a month or so ago, but who cares? It was simply by default. People didn't vote Labour, they just didn't vote Tory. Reform UK started making gains, sure, but not enough. Not enough to make a difference. So, when 3 weeks into this new Labour government we have foreign riots in Leeds, a military man stabbed, and then 3 children killed by a boy who laughs in the dock when he is being charged, a boy of first-generation immigrants, all of this becomes a toxic recipe for it all to boil over. And so it begins. Southport saw the first riot in response to these little girls' deaths, and you can understand why. But that's not what has led to what we have today. Oh no. What has led to what we have now is a 2-pronged attack from the establishment. They had the opportunity to stop this in its tracks, but they didn't. They did something else instead. First, the media labelled anyone demonstrating as far right. Now, I'm sure many of you listening are familiar with this technique of demonization. Say the people are far right and essentially write them off as thugs and lunatics. Very simple, isn't it? Well, this happened in ever-increasing amount in a very short amount of time. This then led to the second attack, directly from the Prime Minister Keir Starmer, who said many things including the following.
People in this country have a right to be safe, and yet we've seen Muslim communities targeted, attacks on mosques, other minority communities singled out, Nazi salutes in the street, attacks on the police, wanton violence alongside racist rhetoric. So no, I won't shy away from calling it what it is. Far-right thuggery.
And here we go.
Keir Starmer is a political chancer, a man who will literally bend the knee for whatever cause is popular at whatever time, but is ultimately a committed left-wing racialist. Not racist, racialist. Now, what's the difference? Well, in truth, a dictionary definition would tell you there is no difference, but in practice, there is. It is essentially a nicer, more polite, and less obvious form of associated eugenics. Let me explain. He is, by every definition, an elitist. He is knighted, for God's sake, a knighted leader of the Labour Party. He doesn't enjoy conversing with working class people outside of procuring votes so that he may stay in power. And he enjoys a quality of life that the majority of people will never see simply due to his position. Now, let's be clear. When I use the word eugenics, I do not mean he hurts people physically or experiments on people like a particular group did back in the 1940s, a group I cannot name on YouTube due to censorship. No. Like with racism, this is a morphed version that is practiced by middle-class elites, particularly politicians, in how they converse and engage their ideas. His weapons are words. He uses phrases, like the mainstream media does, in order to manipulate and get others to come to insane conclusions, such as the association with anyone concerned with immigration as being far right, which he directs people's attention to a specific event like Southport. This ultimately acts as an extension of associating the term far right with anyone who happens to be pale-skinned, as the majority of protesters that day were pale-skinned. It's a very clever methodology, and it's one that's practiced by more people than just Keir Starmer. But he is the Prime Minister now, so he is ultimately responsible. What follows is that these people are then automatically demonized and penalized by a vocal and mainstream favored opposition. You know the ones I mean. The ones that call themselves the tolerant ones. The ones that will have cute things in Twitter bios such as #BeKind, while not being kind themselves. Starmer will defend absolutely anyone but people with paler skin. Thus his new nickname, Two-Tier Keir. Because, my friends, we are living in a Britain that utilizes two-tier policing. Take these two videos, for example. One is of a group calling themselves the Muslim Defense League, that's their name, and the other is of some of the protests that have occurred in favor of wanting change. What do you notice? Do you see any police involved with one and not the other, perhaps? Well, if you do, that's how it's been across the entire country for the last 30 years consistently. Seeing is believing, my friends. Trust me. There is a video here heavily blurred because I cannot show you it on YouTube. However, it is linked in the Google document in the description for you to view, but I do warn you, it is very graphic. So please don't click on it if you're squeamish. But what this blurred video illustrates is the result of such two-tier policing, when two men were stabbed and hacked with axes by members of this so-called Muslim Defense League. The two men had no weapons. Have the people responsible been arrested? Has there been a search for them conducted? There is nothing even being said about it anywhere on any mainstream outlet. No one is reporting on it at the time of recording this video. People are protesting, some with their very lives, because 3 little white girls were murdered. Yes, I am emphasizing colour. I shouldn't have to. It shouldn't matter. But it does. And this is due to a direct result of the failure of government from the last 30 years, a failure to have proper immigration and, more crucially, integration. No one has anything against anyone from the rest of the world. We just want them to get along with our way of life. If you come here, that's what we expect. If I went to Poland or Turkey or whatever it may be, I would assimilate into that culture. I would learn its language. I would learn its customs. The political system doesn't work anymore. But as always, as politicians always do, Keir sends some fake condolences, gets a photo op, puts down some cheap flowers, and then moves on with his day. Moves on, in his case, to calling everyone protesting far right. Because he doesn't actually care about those little girls. They're a means to an end. We saw that in actual footage, which I'll show right now.
How many more children have died in our streets, Prime Minister? How many more children? How many more children, Prime Minister? Are we going to do something? Time for change, Starmer. Come on, it's needed. How many more children? Is it mine next? Stand up for our children. Bye-bye. Got your photos, off you go. Make a real change, Prime Minister.
Let's be honest with each other. As far as I can see, and I may be wrong, there are only two logical outcomes now in order to stop this unrest any further. Firstly, and this is the more favourable one, either Keir Starmer resigns, his successor immediately stops the illegal crossings come across the channel, and installs, ready for the next election, a system of proportional representation for the House of Commons. Or, and this is more likely, martial law will be declared, or rather former martial law will be declared, and Keir will enact the Labour dream, the very Labour dream, the brainchild of Tony Blair, and roll out the use of national ID cards so that no one can rise up against the government again. So that no one has any form of freedom again. You know, I will eventually do a deep dive into the evils that Keir Starmer has committed. You can see a small screenshot of them here. But for now, I think this is enough. Because otherwise, I'll be honest, my head will explode. So instead, I will leave you with this well-put point from GB News.
What has happened to this country that a large group of people feel silenced, they cannot speak about the problems of mass immigration, and when you do, you're labelled, even people on the right or left, you know, you're common sense people who want to have these discussions, you're labelled as a far-right person. Now we're actually seeing the real far-right in this country rising, and the reason for that is they've been silenced for a long time. We ignore the fact that 80% of this country is actually white. We are constantly not prepared to ask deeper level questions. When BLM riots happened in 2020, the media coverage, the social media coverage was all asking the question, why? Why do black people feel the way they feel in this country, in America? But no one seems to be prepared to ask these questions towards these group of people. Instead, they want to put them all in a box of crazy, white, EDL, far-right people, rather than actually sitting there saying, what has happened to this country? Will Keir Starmer actually wake up and actually do something to this, or will we turn into France where this is just going to keep on happening on a regular basis? So I think to stop these riots, we need to have a much more serious conversation about how to stop crime in this country, how to stop certain ethnic groups getting an advantage in terms of not being prosecuted by the police. We saw it in Rotherham with those young girls who were getting exploited. We need to have some serious questions about this. Until then, I don't think the riots will stop anytime soon.
Thank you all for watching. Do take care, and as always, God bless.